Is your opponent annoying you? Always putting their pieces on good squares? Don't you wish you could get their pieces onto bad squares? Well, sometimes you can force your opponent to put their pieces onto bad squares. It's a trick called enticement. In this position, white would like black to move the queen to b5, so that the white knight could fork the king, queen and rook. So white pins the queen with the bishop. Now black has a problem. If black doesn't take the white bishop, then the white bishop will take black's queen on the next move. But if black does take the bishop, then we have enticed the queen onto a bad square. And the queen is lost. So that is enticement. Getting your opponent to move their pieces onto bad squares. Let's have a look at another example. In this position, white can use enticement to give checkmate in 2 moves, by forcing the black king onto a bad square. If white plays rook takes pawn, check, what does black have to do? Black's b7 pawn is pinned, so black would have to take the rook with the king. Let's watch. And this is a really bad square for the black king, but can you spot the checkmate move? Let's take a look at this example, a game which helped Petrosian become world champion. White has an extra knight and pawn. Black has an extra rook. White could take the rook, but Petrosian found a much better move, because he spotted that h8 was a really bad square for the black king. Spassky resigned, because he has to take the white queen. And now Petrosian will take the rook and fork the black king and queen. This game is from the Russian Championship. Good chess players, the Russians, and Tal noticed that d7 is a really bad square for the black king. Can you spot why? With the king on d7, white's knight can fork everything. How good is that? So how did Tal encourage the black king to move to d7? This queen check forks black's king and rook, and the only way to save the rook is to move the king to d7. Black resigned, but let's look at what would have happened. The black pawn can't take the knight, because it's pinned. Let's look at one final example. How does white get this pawn to the end of the board? If the white rook moves out of the way of the pawn, the black rook will be able to take the pawn. So how can white make a7 a bad square for the black rook? Black has to take the white pawn to stop it turning into a queen. But can you spot why a7 is a bad square for the black rook? Uh-oh, the black king and rook are on the same rank. Skewer alert. So that's enticement, forcing your opponent to move pieces onto bad squares. So if you can spot where you'd like your opponent's pieces to be, try and find a way of forcing them there.